Hello, my beautiful friends. It is me, Kari, and it has been way too long since we have read Dicey's song together. I apologize. It just sort of slipped my mind, to be perfectly honest with you. But I was really enjoying doing this, Storytime with Kari series. I know some of you guys have been enjoying it. I've gotten a few comments and a fair amount of views, which is awesome. So we are going to definitely pick up with where we left off with Dicey's song, chapter 3. I'm going to read for about 15-20 minutes, and we'll just see how long, how much of the chapter we get through, because I hate not finishing chapters, but I don't want these videos to be like a half hour long and get cut off or something. So we'll just read for 15-20 minutes or so and see how far we get. Okay. Sorry. I lick my lips and get ready. Okay, here we go. On the days when Sammy rode along behind James on the paper route, Dicey picked up her mail on her way home. It was early in October when Graham got an answer to her letter to the hospital in Boston where Mama was. Dicey found the letter among a pile of advertising circulars in the mailbox. She stuffed all the mail into her science notebook. Dicey would have liked to just leave the circulars or to have them returned to the senders, but Graham said they'd use them to start fires when the weather got cold. Good thinking, Graham. Dicey doubted that it ever got cold here in southern Maryland. By October on the Cape back home, the air was crisp and the leaves were turning colors and the sand had lost all of its summer warmth. Here, all that happened so far was the water in the bay turned clear and you could see to the shallow sandy bottom. And the leaves on the paper mulberry were turning a yellowy green. The nights were chilly, but the days were warm enough for the children's shorts to be comfortable. But Graham promised Dicey that there would be cold weather coming. Graham already had Sammy at work chopping up kindling with a small axe. She had forewarned Dicey that they were going to need to take the big two-handled saw to a couple of fallen trees one of these weekends. Dicey had groaned at this, knowing that the time would have to be taken from the slow work on the boat. At the rate she was going, it would never be ready for the water next spring. But she had groaned silently. Dicey showed the Boston letter to Graham, who was making bread at the kitchen table. Graham looked at it out of the side of her eyes, grunted, and continued kneading. Dicey ate an apple and waited. When they sat down together, Graham looked at Dicey before she opened the envelope. "I hope you're not expecting good news," she said. "I'm not expecting anything," Dicey answered impatiently. "I just want to know what it says." It was a long letter, typed 3 pages. Graham read it once quickly, then again slowly. She didn't show Dicey the pages she was finished with. Dicey bit her lip with impatience and tried not to fidget. When Graham finished the second reading, she folded the papers back into the envelope and then folded her fingers tightly together. Dicey waited. Graham's mouth was straight and her eyes stared vacantly at the envelope. Dicey waited. "I need a cup of tea," Graham announced. She went to the stove to heat water. When her back was to Dicey, she said, "No change." "None at all?" Dicey asked. She kept her voice level, hiding her own disappointment. She spoke as matter-of-factly as Graham did. "So we'll go ahead with the adoption," Graham said. Dicey stared at her, at the strong back under the loose clothing, at her tanned legs and bare feet. "We can get to work on those forms now we know." "What did they say?" Dicey asked. "I told you once, girl, no change. Are you listening?" But the letter was 3 pages long. It didn't take 3 pages to write no change. "What if we went to see her?" Dicey asked. "Do you know how much that would cost?" Whatever it would cost would be too much. Graham dunked the tea bag in her cup, then set it aside to be used again. She turned and looked at Dicey. "Life is a hard business," she remarked. "Was it bad news?" Dicey asked, even though she knew she shouldn't. "Don't you listen?" Graham demanded. There was anger in her voice and in her dark hazel eyes. "It doesn't take 3 pages to say no change," Dicey answered, her own anger rising. But she was angry because she was worried and frightened. Graham snorted. "For doctors it does," she said. "I don't want you making the mistake of thinking life isn't going to be hard," she said. "I know that," Dicey said. "I guess you do. I'm a natural fool," Graham said. "I keep trying to count on things. And Sammy's too young for that long bike ride, maybe," Graham said. Dicey knew what the woman was thinking, how the connections were made behind her eyes, but she was glad nobody was there to hear how Graham's mind jumped around. "I'm going to the barn if that's all right," Dicey said. She waited for her grandmother to answer. If Graham wanted Dicey to stay for company, Dicey would like that. But Graham just said, "Suit yourself." Dicey shrugged and went out to get a little work done on the boat, and she did not let herself wonder what it was Graham had been counting on, because Graham said the letter said no change. October went on. The children were settling in just as fall was settling in, over the farm and the water, into shades of brown, the harrowed soil, the dried summer grasses, the broken stalks of corn, and the long golden bars of sunlight from a sun setting closer to 7 now than 8. Graham had filed all of her forms with the lawyer's help. Now they awaited action on the fat folders filled with copies of the children's birth certificates and school records, with government papers in triplicate saying everything that could be written down in numbers about Graham and the farm, about Mama and the kids. Sammy mostly left Dicey alone with the boat, and when he did come bother her, she had one side more than half done by then, seemed only interested in asking questions about how the Indians scalped people and whether there were ghosts, about the ragged bottom of the big barn doors. Do you think someone did that on purpose? He asked, fingering the broken-off boards. Dicey, if you hit at it with a bat or a sledgehammer? How's school? Dicey asked. Fine, I guess, Sammy told her, not interested in the subject. Well, at least he wasn't coming home with black eyes and bruises and ripped clothes, the way he had from school in Provincetown and from summer camp in Bridgeport. As long as Sammy wasn't fighting, Dicey wasn't going to worry about him. James worked hard, reading and taking notes for his report. He'd decided on a topic, why the Pilgrims came to America. It's interesting, he said, but he didn't want to talk about it. It's nice to have something to do again, he told them. Maybeth came home from school one day with an invitation to a birthday party. You can ride your bike, and I'll ride mine to pick you up, Dicey said, because it would be getting dark when the party was over. What'll you do about a present? Dicey didn't know what a guest at a birthday party was supposed to do. I thought I'd make something, Maybeth told her. With pine cones. Graham will help. Will you help, Graham? Of course I will, but you can't wear your shorts and t-shirt. All the children's clothes had to be practical. They had shorts and shirts, that was all. That doesn't matter, Maybeth said. Maybe it really doesn't, James said to his grandmother. Do you know who else is invited, Maybeth? Is it the whole class? Just some of us, she told him. The cake's going to have pink frosting. Maybeth was making friends, and Sammy seemed not to be getting into trouble, and James was working hard. Dicey herself had what might be called a friend in Mina. They'd gotten A's on their rock classification project, and Mina always greeted Dicey at school whenever she saw her. Hey, Dicey, how you doing? Hey, Dicey, how you doing? Dicey always answered, pretty good, and you? The way you were supposed to. Then she beat a fast path to her desk or the next class. She didn't want anybody to think she was trying to have friends. She had seen the guitar-playing boy a couple of times. The first time she had walked right up and asked him the words for the song about the coat of many colors. He remembered her. After a while, she saw him every day it wasn't raining. He was sitting in the same place, playing his guitar when she rushed out to get her bike and go to work. He told her his name, Jeff, and asked hers. Dicey Tillerman, she said, and waited for what he would say next. You related to that old lady with the farm, he asked. Dicey nodded, her chin held high. What are you, a grandchild? Dicey nodded again. Listen, you can sing the melody of that song, he asked her. I want to try a harmony. Dicey could, and did, listening to his voice as he made a harmony line with what she was singing, sometimes blending, sometimes moving in contrast. She thought he was fancying it up too much, but she didn't say so. And she liked singing that song, even though she didn't understand the story of it. You sing pretty well, Jeff remarked. Not particularly, Dicey told him, just better than you. My sister is the one who can really sing. You should hear her sing this song. I'd like to, he said, his face friendly. What did he expect her to do, invite him to her house or something? There was something he expected or wanted. Dicey could see that. I gotta go now, she said. Why? He asked. I've got another song you might like. I gotta go, Dicey insisted, and turned away to get her bike out of the rack and ride away. Millie never minded if Dicey was a few minutes late. She didn't seem to notice. The business continued to improve, Dicey thought. Millie never said anything, as if she had forgotten the terms of their deal. The third week came and went without a word from Millie, and the fourth week. The only thing Millie said about business to Dicey happened when Dicey came in to find her at the checkout counter studying a long printout. Behind her, all over one of the aisles, boxes of dried cereal were spread around. Millie was reading down the sheet, her lips moving silently, her fingers moving along under the words. Want me to put those up on display, Dicey offered. I don't know where they came from, Millie said. I don't know where they'll fit. You didn't order them? Millie shook her head. Dicey looked around for what to do. The windows could wait another day or two, or they could be washed right away. The floor needed a damp mopping, she decided. The windows would wait. Oh no, Millie spoke behind her. Look what I did. Sometimes I'm so stupid. Just look at that. Dicey looked over her shoulder. The page was the distributor's order sheet. Millie had filled it out in pencil, changing her mind many times, as Dicey could tell by the erasures and crossings out. I meant to order corn chips, and I ordered corn flakes. I'll never sell all these boxes. What'll I do? Can't you send them back? But the corn chips are for people who want them. I always have them. Or have a special sale on corn flakes, Dicey suggested. How could Millie have mistaken those two words? I hate the ordering. I always make mistakes, and I have to check it all the time. Herbie, he tried to teach me how to do it, but he gave up. The sheet looked pretty simple to Dicey. You just found the items you wanted and put the number you wanted in a little box beside the name, and then you figured out how much it cost and copied that down. How can you make mistakes on this, she asked. Because I never learned how to read. Not properly. I can't even read a newspaper. You didn't know that, did you? You didn't know what a stupid old woman you were working for. But you went to school, Dicey told her. You said you went to school with Graham. Millie laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. They kept me back some when I was littler. Then I got so big, it was embarrassing to them. And I always behaved myself, so they'd just pass me on. I never graduated. Didn't Ab tell you? No, she's no gossip. Doesn't matter, and it didn't then, because I was going to get married. Herbie didn't care. He liked me the way I was. You wouldn't understand. You're one of those smart kids. You can't read? Dicey was amazed. Of course I can read, Millie said patiently. I just take so long at it, and the words all look alike. I don't know. Maybe now with all the machines there for teaching, maybe now I could have learned. But it's too late for me. Dicey didn't know what to say. If you told me what you wanted, I could fill out the order sheet, she finally offered. Millie's face showed hope. Do you think so? You're awfully young. Sure, Dicey answered. I don't have any idea of what you should stock in, but I can read names and numbers. That would be a load off my mind, Millie said. It's gotten so since Herbie died. The distributor won't let me return things anymore if I make a mistake. And then, she confided, I get so nervous about making a mistake, I go over it again and again. And it takes so long, and I can't think properly about it. Sometimes I cross out what I wanted to order and order the wrong things, as if I wanted to do it wrong. Dicey nodded and kept her face expressionless. Then you do want me to stay on, she asked. Stay on? Here? Of course, Millie said. What made you think I didn't? I can't handle all this business alone. I was just making sure, Dicey said quickly. Dicey rode home to Graham's house these October days, through sunlight turning golden and red, stopped by this mailbox, wondering each time why Graham had said nothing to the little kids about that letter from the doctor in Boston, and put in a quick half-hour's work on the boat. She had accepted the slowness with which she was going to make progress. She kept herself from being impatient, just as she kept herself private at school. After supper these days, and before she dashed through her own homework, she read with Maybeth for a while, for a half hour or so, the two of them at the kitchen table. Maybeth had lists of words she was supposed to memorize, vocabulary sheets. In the reading book, these words appeared in the stories. Mrs. Jackson had told Maybeth that if she stumbled on a word in a story, then she should go back and memorize the list again. So most of the time, poor Maybeth was guessing her way through a list of 20 words, and Dicey would stop her when she made a mistake, and Maybeth would go back to the top of the list and start again. Maybeth didn't seem discouraged, but Dicey sure was. She thought about Maybeth and Millie, and she didn't want Maybeth to be like Millie when she grew up. It wasn't that Dicey didn't like Millie, because she did. It was all right working for Millie. Dicey was learning a lot about how to run a grocery store, and hoped that sometime Millie might show her how to butcher the sides of meat. But it wasn't interesting, not like other people she had worked for when she had conversations with them. She felt pretty sorry for Millie, so big and slow-witted. She wanted something better than Millie's life for Maybeth. Maybeth plugged along, reading, math, social studies. She never practiced the piano until everything else was done. At the piano, at least, Maybeth moved fast. The scales had given way to rhythmic exercises and to real pieces, with chords. James, studying the music in one of the books Mr. Lingerly had loaned Maybeth, said he couldn't figure out how she could read the notes off onto the piano keys. Maybeth said it wasn't hard. James said he thought it looked harder than reading words. Maybeth shook her head no and went back to the piece she was playing. Graham took an old blouse of hers with tiny flowers printed on it and cut it down to make a dress for Maybeth to wear to the birthday party. It took her a week, every night, to finish it. It wasn't a great dress, but Maybeth looked pretty in it. She was so excited she whirled around the living room, letting the skirt swirl out. James showed Dicey his report on the Pilgrims. Dicey only read it because he wanted her to so badly, but once she'd started, she found herself really interested. James had written about all the reasons why the Mayflower people wanted to come to America. He had found out who they all were and where they'd come from and what happened to them once they got to Plymouth. Dicey was surprised at what he was saying. Only some of the people came over for religious reasons, and even those, as James pointed out, hadn't come because of a belief in religious freedom. They came over to practice their own religion, which was a very different thing from what Dicey had always heard. Some of the people came because they weren't welcome in the society of England, because they were sort of rotten apples there. Some came because they had to, like wives and children and indentured servants. Some came because they wanted to live and work in a land that civilization hadn't already polished and divided, because they loved wildness, because they wanted to match themselves up against the wilderness and see how they did. Dicey could understand that feeling. Some of the settlers were looking for easy money, gold or furs, to get rich quick. "It's really good," she said to James when she finished reading. He was standing anxiously beside her. "You think so?" "It's interesting," Dicey said. "I'll bet it's the best report anybody does. I'll bet it's miles better than any other report in your class, I'll tell you," she said, overwhelmed into honesty by the impression it made on her. "I don't think I could write one this good." James tried not to look as pleased as he felt. "You think Graham would like to read it?" he asked. At about that time, Mr. Chappell assigned Dicey's class a paper. He wanted them to write a character sketch, he said, about a real character they had met, someone they knew. He wanted them to show the conflict in a real person's life. As soon as he said that, the complaints and questions began. Dicey stopped paying attention. She knew who she'd like to write about. She knew a whole lot of people. Mama, for one, but she couldn't, because that wasn't any of his business. Will Hawkins was another. She'd like writing about him. Not about the way he'd been a good friend to the children, taken them along with his circus and driven them down to Chrisfield, and not even thinking about what it was like, and not even about what it was like to live with the circus, although that would be interesting. Dicey would write about the way Will was so honest with his friends, yet tricked the people who came to see his shows, because the circus was like that, full of tricks that you didn't know about until, like the 4 children who had lived in it. Probably the people who came to see the shows didn't care, but it wasn't what the people wanted that interested Dicey. She wanted to write about those two opposite sides of Will. Maybe if she wrote about him, she could figure out how he fit those two sides together in his life. Maybe he did it by keeping them entirely separate, his friends and his work. She thought about him, traveling now around the country with the circus. He'd promised to come and see them when the circus came back to the area, and she believed that he would. And then there was Cousin Eunice back in Bridgeport. In Dicey's opinion, Cousin Eunice was a boring person, but she had conflicts too. She too had taken the children in, but she had only done it because she wanted people to think she'd done the right thing. What she really wanted to do was live the life she'd planned for herself before the Tillemans turned up. She didn't want the children. They were nothing but trouble to her. Trouble and expense. But she'd made herself change all her plans. Dicey might just write something as good as James, she thought, the ideas tumbling around in her head. Then she corrected herself. Almost as good as James. James was just too smart for her to keep up. Maybe she could write about Mama if she called her Mrs. Liza. Then Mr. Chappell wouldn't ever guess who she really was. If she just didn't say certain things. After class, Mina waited for Dicey by the door. "This essay might be fun," Mina said. "I've got an idea." Dicey didn't know why Mina wanted to talk to her. They'd hurried on through the crowded halls to Homac. "I'd like to talk to you about it," Mina said. "Sure," Dicey said. She usually liked Mina's ideas. "How about after school?" "Can't," Dicey said. Mina waited for her to say more, but Dicey didn't. She wasn't sure why she didn't, except that the more anybody knew about her, they had a kind of hold on her. She wasn't sure, anyway, about how Mina would feel about Dicey having a job, if Mina would feel sorry for her. "You want to come by my house?" Mina asked. "Can't," Dicey said. Mina looked at her and Dicey looked right back. Contradictory expressions were on Mina's face, a little confusion and some anger and some laughter. Mina chose to laugh. "You sure are a hard person to be friends with, Dicey Tillerman." Was that what Mina was doing? Dicey was so surprised because Mina had lots of friends already. She didn't even answer. They entered the horrible home ec class where they were supposed to be making work aprons using everything they had learned about cutting and sewing, hems and buttons. Dicey had figured out a way to avoid most of the button troubles, a pretty clever way, she thought. The rules were you had to have 2 buttons on it and a hem and a tie around the neck. Dicey was following the rules, but in her own way. It had gotten so she'd almost count on seeing sorry. It had gotten so she could almost count on seeing Jeff after school over by the bike racks. He'd call out to her, "Hey, Dicey." She would saunter over. "You ever hear this one?" he'd ask, and play a song. Some of them, a lot of them, she already knew. One because it was in her mind for some reason. Once because it was in her mind for some reason, she asked him to play one of Mama's favorites. "The water is wide, I cannot go o'er." He didn't know it and said he'd never heard it, but a couple of days later he had it ready for her. Usually Dicey would stay and sing with him because she liked singing. A couple times he asked her about her sister who could sing so well, but Dicey never told him much. She thought, though, Maybeth would like Jeff. He was in 10th grade, he said, and he reminded Dicey that she was in 8th. "I know that," Dicey answered. "So do I," he said, peering up at her from where he sat bent over his guitar. The conversation was stupid, but she smiled. He smiled back, but she had to get to work, so she didn't bother finding out whether he thought it was stupid too. One day when Dicey came up to the back porch under a gray sky, her hands and shorts flecked with some of the paint she had scraped, she heard the piano playing a rolling, rippling melody, one that you couldn't ever sing along with. There were no words that could keep up with the notes that swept from bass up through tenor to soprano. The piano was the only voice that could manage to sing that song. She stopped and listened, dumbfounded. How had Maybeth gotten so very good all at once? She stepped into the kitchen and saw Maybeth sitting down at the table with Graham. Their heads were bent down over a reading book. Beside them was one of the word lists Mrs. Jackson never ran out of. Maybeth read aloud, word by mumbling word. You could hear her guessing. Dicey followed the music down the hall. A man was at the piano. He was so fat that his fanny hung down over the back of the bench. He was fat like a cartoon fat person. For a minute, Dicey saw nothing but fatness. Then she looked at the details. The back of his head was a bald spot, a pink circle with a few stray hairs carefully combed over it, as if it were trying to hide it. Like trying to hide a basketball under 3 shoelaces, Dicey thought. His eyes and nose and mouth were all buried in the flesh of his face, and his double chins hung down. His hands, despite looking thick and clumsy at the ends of his huge arms, danced over the piano keys. He was concentrating so hard, adjusting his position on the bench as the chords took him up and down the keyboard. Staring down at the keys under his fingers, the sweat ran down by his ear, and his shirt was stained under the armpits. His mouth was open as if he was panting, and the music poured out of the piano like a stream pouring down the side of a mountain, or like the winds pouring over the bending branches of trees. Dicey stood, listening. Alright guys, we're going to stop right there because I don't want this to be too long. Oh no, there's actually quite a bit more of chapter 3. Wow, there are long chapters in this book. So we're going to pick up, hopefully, a lot sooner than the time from the last video till now, but I hope you guys are enjoying. If you are, please feel free to like this video. It always makes me feel good when you guys do that, but of course it's never required. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you like the crazy diversity of what I post here on PerseveringStar. And I look forward to reading with you guys again soon. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll be back soon with more stuff. Bye, guys.